In this session of the Harmony of Religions, we will explore the concept of liberty of conscience and its development across time and cultures. Religious freedom, or the right to hold and practice beliefs alone or with others, has been a contested issue throughout history, giving rise to debates, movements, and conflicts over tolerance and restriction. We will examine the key events, influential figures, and philosophical shifts that have shaped the contemporary understanding and complexities of religious freedom. Swami Vivekananda was the star speaker of the World's Parliament of Religions at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. His opening remarks to the Assembly on September 11, 1893, set the tone for the historic event as he addressed the gathering with the words, "Sisters and Brothers of America." This greeting was met with a standing ovation that lasted several minutes, and Vivekananda's message of universal brotherhood deeply resonated with the audience. He went on to speak about the harmony that exists among diverse faiths in his homeland of India. Vivekananda emphasized the importance of religious tolerance and mutual respect, and how the world could benefit from peaceful coexistence among the different religions of the world. He said, "Sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant, fanaticism, have long possessed this beautiful earth. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilization, and sent whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would be far more advanced than it is now." He called for an end to all fanaticism, all persecutions with the sword or with the pen, and all uncharitable feelings between persons wending their way to the same goal. Ancient Egypt provides one of the earliest examples of a spiritual purpose and social value for the development of a moral conscience. Central to this worldview was the concept of Ma'at, the principle of truth, justice, and cosmic order. The Egyptians believed that Ma'at not only maintained the universe, but also governed their daily lives. After her responsibility in creation and continuously preventing the universe from returning to chaos, Ma'at's primary role in ancient Egyptian religion dealt with the weighing of the heart that took place in the afterlife. The principle of Ma'at dictated right behavior in personal, social, and political contexts, encouraging citizens to live honorably and truthfully in all matters, whether related to family, the community, or the gods. Cosmic harmony was achieved by correct public and ritual life. Any disturbance in cosmic harmony could have consequences for the individual as well as the state. To the Egyptian mind, Ma'at bound all things together in an indestructible unity. The universe, the natural world, the state, and the individual were all seen as parts of the wider order generated by Ma'at. This aspect of Ma'at gave rise to the social formation of groups of elite individuals called Seish, referring to intellectuals, scribes, or bureaucrats. Although few were formally literate in ancient Egypt, writing was an important part of citizens' lives, and scribes carried out literate functions for large masses of individuals. Besides acting as the civil servant of the kingdom, the seiche had a prestigious role in the society, since the ethical and moral concepts of Mot were interpreted, promoted, and maintained by this class of individuals. Scribal schools emerged during the Middle Kingdom era some 4,000 years ago. Although scribal practices had been implemented before this period, there is no evidence of systematic schooling to transform people into the literate seiche or scribes who could function for society and bureaucracy. Literacy training among ancient Egyptians revolved around the mastery of writing and reading and their specific purposes of conducting administration. The students were taught two types of writing by their teachers: sacred writing and instructive writing. Sacred writing emphasized Mot and moral and ethical values and directives, while instructive writing covered specific discussion about land measurement and arithmetic for evaluating the annual changes of the river and land configurations, as well as for calculating tax, recording commercial business, and distributing resources and supplies among the community. Letter writing became a significant part of the daily function of ancient Egyptian citizens. Letters were not merely mailed to their recipients, they were performed by scribes who often wrote them on behalf of a king. As a pharaoh, Akhenaten restricted traditional ancient Egyptian polytheistic religion and introduced monotheistic solar worship. For about 20 years, he largely supplanted the age-old beliefs and practices of the Egyptian state religion and deposed its religious hierarchy headed by the powerful priesthood of Amun at Thebes. For 15 centuries, the Egyptians had worshipped an extended family of gods and goddesses, each of which had its own elaborate system of priests, temples, and rituals. The pinnacle of the religious hierarchy was the pharaoh, both king and living god, the Lord of Mot. The administration of the Egyptian kingdom was thus inextricably bound up with and largely controlled by the power and influence of the priests and scribes. Akhenaten's reforms cut away both the philosophical and economic basis of priestly and scribal power, abolishing the sects of all other deities, and with them the large and lucrative industry of tributes that the priests controlled. However, subsequent pharaohs ended the movement in the aftermath of Akhenaten's death, and large-scale efforts were then undertaken to remove from Egypt and Egyptian records any presence or mention of Akhenaten, Atenist temples, or assertions of a uniquely supreme god. In Mesopotamia, religion played a central role in everyday life, with gods deeply intertwined with nature, politics, and societal order. The Mesopotamians were polytheistic and worshipped with rituals, offerings, and temple building for a vast pantheon of deities who controlled every aspect of existence, from the weather to human destiny. Kings and rulers often derived their authority from divine mandates, enforcing laws that were said to be given by the gods themselves. Hammurabi's Code, one of the earliest legal texts, was believed to be inspired by Shamash, the Mesopotamian sun god of light and justice. In the code, Hammurabi established guidelines for social order and justice, including a dramatic trial by ordeal for accusations of sorcery. It says, if a man charges a man with sorcery and cannot prove it, he who is charged shall go to the river, Into the river he shall throw himself, and if the river overcome him, his accuser shall take to himself his house. The treatment of sorcery accusations reflects broader themes of control and compliance within religious and civil contexts. The Cyrus cylinder, created around 539 BC, is often regarded as one of the earliest declarations of human rights and stands as a symbol of tolerance and religious freedom in the ancient world. Commissioned by Cyrus II of Persia, also known as Cyrus the Great, the cylinder details his policies of repatriation following the conquest of Babylon. Cyrus is renowned for his general policy of toleration, allowing the diverse customs and religions of the peoples within his vast empire to flourish. Notably, his Edict of Restoration facilitated the return of the Jewish people to Jerusalem after the Babylonian captivity, marking a significant turning point in their history. This act is recorded in the Hebrew Bible, where Cyrus is referred to as a Messiah for his efforts in building the Second Temple in Jerusalem. By restoring sacred sites and supporting the practice of various faiths, Cyrus set a precedent for religious pluralism, justice, and respect for cultural diversity. Pythagoras, the ancient Greek philosopher and mathematician, is also renowned for the mystical teachings he acquired through decades of study in Babylon, Egypt, and India. He established a private school at Crotona, where he and his followers lived according to strict ethical and philosophical principles. Tensions arose when a local, angered by the perceived elitism of the Brotherhood, incited a mob against them. In a fit of rage, the townspeople torched the homes of the Brotherhood while its members slept, leading to chaos and violence. As the members attempted to flee, many were brutally stabbed to death. At the age of 75, Pythagoras narrowly escaped the massacre, but may have perished from starvation while hiding, or possibly taken his own life to avoid capture. Others speculate he was murdered. This tragic end shows the fragility of religious communities in the face of social unrest and hostility. Socrates stood trial before a jury of Athenian citizens, charged with accusations of desecration and mockery of the divine, as well as the corruption of youth. Already infamous for questioning assumptions and challenging social norms, he stated during the proceedings, "I have been going about the city persuading you, young and old, to cease from caring for your bodies or your money before your souls." This statement reflects his prioritizing the pursuit of knowledge and virtue above all else. Despite a vigorous defense that emphasized the value of philosophical inquiry and truth-seeking, the jury ultimately found him guilty. Socrates was sentenced to death by consuming a potion made with hemlock. Even when given the opportunity to escape from prison, he refused, believing that to flee would betray his principles and undermine the rule of law. His steadfast commitment to his beliefs, even under penalty of death, transformed him into a martyr for intellectual integrity in the face of social pressures. Aristotle studied under Plato in Athens, where he was deeply influenced by Socratic thought. While Plato emphasized ideal forms, Aristotle focused on the tangible world, establishing the importance of empirical observation and classification. In 322 BCE, the Hierophant of the Eleusinian Mysteries accused Aristotle of impiety due to a song he had composed for his father-in-law. To evade trial and potential execution, Aristotle chose voluntary exile, declaring, "I will not allow the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy." He died shortly thereafter at age 62. Ashoka the Great is an example of the philosopher king, or Rajarshi, a term that indicates the ideal governor in ancient India, a man who integrates spiritual wisdom with political authority. After his conversion to Buddhism, Ashoka adopted principles of nonviolence, compassion, and moral governance, which he promoted in his administration. His edicts emphasized ethical conduct and religious pluralism. Ashoka declared that his sacred and gracious majesty desires that in all places should reside people of diverse religious sects. He taught the importance of listening to people and respecting the faiths of others, asserting that honoring different beliefs enriches one's own faith. Ashoka cautioned against sectarianism, noting that to foster one's own sect, depreciating the others, is to do the worst harm to one's own sect. Missionaries spread this message of toleration as far away as Syria. The Great Revolt was a series of events in Roman imperial history, beginning with the census of 6 CE, which ignited Jewish discontent. The zealot rebels sought to resist Roman oppression, particularly in response to perceived injustices in taxation and governance. Tensions escalated dramatically following Emperor Caligula's decree in 39 to erect a statue in the Jerusalem temple. Jewish leaders staged a non-violent protest against this desecration, but Caligula was assassinated before the installation could occur. However, the grievances continued to fester, culminating in the Jewish-Roman War from 66 to 73. This brutal conflict saw Roman forces attack Jerusalem, leading to the looting and destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70, a cultural catastrophe that forever altered Jewish religious life. The atrocities did not end there. Between 115 and 117, widespread Jewish riots erupted across the diaspora in regions like Cyprus, Egypt, and Libya. The Bar Kokhba revolt from 132 to 136 was the last major Jewish uprising against Rome, provoked by Emperor Hadrian's plans to build a Roman city and a temple to Jupiter on the ruins of Jerusalem. Hundreds of thousands died in the battles, and the Jews were banned from their homeland, which was subsequently renamed Syria, Palestine. The persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire is marked by several significant events and policies that illustrate the tumultuous relationship between the state and this emerging religious group. After the Great Fire of Rome in year 64, Emperor Nero famously blamed Christians, resulting in brutal retaliation. Among the early martyrs, St. Peter was crucified and Paul the Apostle was beheaded. During Domitian's reign, Christians faced tyranny, particularly those who evaded the Fiscus Judaicus, a tax levied on Jews. Emperor Trajan set a troubling precedent when he approved the death penalty for Christians without any legal justification. In contrast, Hadrian attempted to curtail slanderous accusations against Christians, stipulating that they should only be punished for illegal acts. The Edict of Septimius Severus further restricted conversions to Judaism and Christianity. The situation deteriorated under Decius, who mandated empire-wide executions of Christians refusing to worship Roman gods. Diocletian issued numerous orders to confiscate Christian property and execute Manichaeans. A turning point came with Galerius's Edict of Toleration in 311, which effectively ended the persecution of Christians. This shift continued with Constantine's Edict of Milan, granting all individuals, including Christians, the freedom to follow their religion of choice. Finally, Theodosius's Edict of Thessalonica established Nicene Christianity as the state church of the Roman Empire. As Christianity transitioned from a persecuted sect to the state religion of the Roman Empire, the dynamics of power and authority within the church shifted dramatically. The early Christians, who once faced brutal oppression under Roman rule, became the new arbiters of orthodoxy, often employing similar tactics against those deemed heretical. With the founding of Nicene Christianity as the state religion, a plethora of beliefs emerged that challenged the established doctrine. Movements such as Gnosticism posed significant theological threats, prompting the church to respond with doctrinal condemnation and persecution. Various factions faced oppression as the church sought to exert total control. So-called heretics faced severe punishment for their beliefs, often branded as enemies of the state. Perhaps Christianity's perennial nemesis is Islam, which is often misrepresented as an intolerant, fanatical religion. However, the Quran calls for unity in diversity in 49:13. O mankind, we have created you from male and female, and made you peoples and tribes, so that you may know one another. This message asserts the idea that human differences, whether in culture, belief, or nation, are opportunities for mutual understanding rather than division. The Constitution of Medina, drafted by the Prophet Muhammad, enshrined principles of religious freedom and social cooperation among the diverse communities of Medina, including Muslims, Jews, and others. It is one of the earliest examples of a pluralistic society governed by mutual respect and shared civic responsibility. In later centuries, the Islamic Golden Age fostered intellectual and cultural pluralism. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became a center for knowledge, where scholars of different faiths collaborated. Al-Farabi envisioned a virtuous city where reason and ethics guide society. Averroes argued in the Decisive Treatise for the harmony of faith and reason, asserting that religious truth complements philosophical inquiry or science. Al-Andalus, or the Islamic Iberian Peninsula, exemplified pluralism, with Jews, Christians, and Muslims thriving together, particularly from the 10th to 12th centuries until the expulsion in 1492, which ended a rich era of intellectual and religious coexistence. God wills it became the rallying cry of the Crusades, a series of religious wars initiated by Pope Urban II in 1095 to claim Jerusalem from Muslim rule. While framed as a sacred mission, the Crusades were marked by complex motivations, including political ambition, economic gain, and religious fanaticism. The Crusades were a defining moment in the history of Christian-Muslim relations, resulting in a millennia of mistrust and hatred. The Crusades also exemplify the dark side of religious fanaticism, as these wars saw widespread persecution not only of Muslims, but also Jews and Eastern Christians, showcasing the violent potential of intolerance. The conquest of Jerusalem in 1099 saw mass slaughter in the name of God, contradicting any notion of harmony between religions. As the Crusades raged, the religious and political landscape of Europe became increasingly complex. Emerging in this period were the Knights Templar, a powerful monastic military order founded in 1119 to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. With their headquarters on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the Templars rose to prominence not only as warriors, but also as innovators in finance. They established an early banking system, allowing secure transfers of wealth across borders, and controlled vast estates and treasures. Their influence grew to the point where they were exempt from local laws, free to cross borders without taxation, and answerable only to the Pope. However, after the failure of the Crusades, the Templars became vulnerable. In 1307, Pope Clement V ordered the arrest of Templars across Europe. The knights were falsely accused of heresy and witchcraft, leading to the order's disbanding. Many Templars were tortured and executed, and their assets were seized. A discovery in the Vatican archives in 2001 revealed that the Knights Templar were secretly pardoned, a fact that remained hidden for over 700 years. The Inquisition, commenced by the Catholic Church, was a series of institutional efforts to identify, condemn, and eradicate heresy within Christendom. It began in 1184 with a papal bull which marked the Church's first formal move to combat heretical movements. Over the centuries, Vatican decrees expanded the reach and authority of inquisitorial procedures, allowing for the use of torture in interrogations and empowering secular authorities to enforce religious conformity. The Inquisition intensified in Spain in 1478, and by 1484, Pope Innocent VIII linked witchcraft with heresy. The Inquisition's actions often blurred the lines between religious and political power, with grave consequences for those accused of heresy. Although its formal operations ended, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith most recently issued norms for proceeding in the discernment of alleged supernatural phenomena in 2024. John Wycliffe was an English theologian who advocated for the translation of the Bible into English, arguing that Scripture should be accessible to all. His radical ideas fueled the Peasants' Revolt in 1381, and Wycliffe was posthumously declared a heretic in 1415, with his remains exhumed and burned as a warning against dissent. Jan Hus emerged as a key figure in the Bohemian Reformation, challenging church practices and advocating for reform. His vocal criticism led to his imprisonment and execution by burning at the stake for heresy. Joan of Arc faced charges of heresy, witchcraft, and cross-dressing. Though she was executed by burning, her reputation was later rehabilitated. In 1456, her verdict was overturned and she was canonized in 1920. William Tyndale was a pioneering scholar who translated the New Testament into English. His efforts for scriptural accessibility led to his condemnation as a heretic and his execution by burning. The Index of Forbidden Books was established by the Catholic Church in 1559 to safeguard the faith by prohibiting the reading of texts deemed heretical, immoral, or contrary to the teachings of the Church. This list included works by prominent thinkers such as John Calvin, Nicholas Copernicus, René Descartes, and Galileo Galilei, reflecting the Church's effort to control the intellectual landscape of the time. The index was not merely a list, it was a tool of religious authority intended to protect the faithful from perceived spiritual dangers. The process for placing a book on the index involved critical scrutiny by church officials who evaluated texts based on doctrinal conformity. Authors and publishers faced severe consequences, including excommunication and persecution, if they defied these prohibitions. Over the centuries, the index evolved, with many revisions made to its contents. Its final edition was published in 1948, and the index was formally abolished in 1966 during the Second Vatican Council. The doctrine of discovery represents a troubling aspect of colonial expansion, coupling religious authority with imperial ambition. Initiated by papal bulls such as Romanus Pontifex and Inter Cetera, this series of decrees granted Christians the right to invade and capture infidel territories, legitimizing the exploitation of lands and peoples without moral or ethical restraint. These documents served as justification for acts of violence, human trafficking, and the near annihilation of indigenous populations. While the papal bull Sublimis Dei sought to temper these excesses by restricting the doctrine to the goal of conversion and disavowing slavery and killing, it did not dismantle the fundamental framework that allowed for domination and exploitation in the name of Christianity. This highlights the contradictions of advocating for the spiritual care of souls while simultaneously enabling the material and cultural devastation of entire communities. The doctrine of discovery exemplifies how religious teaching can be exploited to support oppressive systems. The internal fracturing of Christianity reshaped the religious and political landscape of Europe. The East-West Schism of 1054 divided Christianity into the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, establishing a rift that would last for centuries. This was further complicated by the Papal Schism from 1378 to 1417, during which rival popes claimed authority, undermining the Church's unity and credibility. The Act of Supremacy in 1534 declared King Henry VIII head of the Church of England and signified a shift towards national churches and further splintered Christendom. The Protestant Reformation, ignited by Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517, called out the corruption within the Catholic clergy. Luther was declared an outlaw, threatened with imprisonment, and ultimately excommunicated for his challenge to papal authority. In France, the Edict of Nantes granted religious freedom to Huguenots, seeking to end brutal conflicts with Catholics, but its revocation in 1685 reignited persecution. The 30 Years' War devastated Europe as Protestant and Catholic states clashed, culminating in the Peace of Westphalia, which recognized the importance of religious tolerance. The Puritans sought religious freedom in their exodus from Europe, but their own intolerance reveals a complex contradiction within their community. John Winthrop, a leading figure and co-founder of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, famously articulated the vision of a city upon a hill in his sermon, A Model of Christian Charity. However, he also presided over the trial of Anne Hutchinson, whose Bible study groups challenged the rigid orthodoxy of Puritan clergy. Convicted of slander and disturbing the peace, Hutchinson was banished in the same mode of intolerance that the Puritans had fled from in Europe. Similarly, Roger Williams, who advocated for the separation of church and state and the right to freedom of conscience, found himself exiled for his dangerous opinions. He went on to establish Providence Plantations, a sanctuary for those seeking religious liberty. In contrast, John Winthrop Jr., while part of the same community, diverged by collecting esoteric texts and founding an alchemical colony in Connecticut. His respect for diverse ideas and his interventions to halt witchcraft prosecutions suggested an approach that contrasted sharply with the prevailing Puritan orthodoxy of his father. These narratives illustrate the complex interplay of freedom and intolerance in early America. The Salem witch trials of 1692 are a dark chapter in American history, illustrating the dangers of religious fanaticism and mass psychosis. Rooted in a Puritan community marked by fear and superstition, these trials emerged as a response to a series of unexplained afflictions among the townspeople, which were attributed to witchcraft. The trials led to the execution of 20 individuals, mostly women, and the imprisonment of hundreds of others, reflecting a climate of fear in the community. Key figures in the trials included Cotton Mather and his father, Increase Mather, both influential Puritan ministers who played significant roles in the proceedings. Their writings contributed to the prevailing belief in the reality of witchcraft and the need for decisive action against supposed witches. The trials concluded with the eventual discrediting of the court and a growing recognition of the need for rational legal processes. This tragic episode serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of religious fanaticism and the importance of protecting individual rights against intolerance and collective insanity. In his letter concerning toleration, John Locke articulates a vision of religious freedom that challenged the norms of his time. Written during a period of religious conflict and persecution in England, Locke argues that the acceptance of differing beliefs is not only aligned with the gospel of Jesus Christ, but is also rooted in reason itself. He asserts that true tolerance is the defining characteristic of a legitimate church. For Locke, it is monstrous for individuals to overlook the necessity and advantages of religious tolerance, a notion that was particularly relevant amid the struggles between Catholics and Protestants, as well as various dissenting groups. Locke emphasizes that a church is essentially a voluntary association of individuals who unite for the purpose of worshiping God in a way they believe to be acceptable. This concept of voluntary participation challenges the idea that individuals are bound by their birth to a specific faith or denomination, advocating for personal choice in matters of belief. Locke's call for religious tolerance marks a pivotal shift toward a society where belief is a matter of personal conscience rather than coercion. Voltaire champions the principle of religious tolerance as an essential aspect of human dignity and coexistence. Written against a backdrop of intense religious strife, Voltaire argues that Christians, and indeed all people, should embrace one another as brothers, regardless of their differing beliefs. He critiques the notion that the Creator would condemn virtuous individuals, such as Confucius, Socrates, and Plato, to eternal torment simply for their lack of adherence to a specific faith. This profound assertion highlights Voltaire's commitment to a universal moral order that transcends sectarian divides. His appeal turns from humanity to the divine, beseeching God to extend compassion towards humanity's inherent errors, which are often a product of cultural and historical context rather than moral failing. Jean-Jacques Rousseau articulates a vision of civil religion that combines governance and spirituality based on a universal concept of a supreme being who rewards virtue and punishes vice both in this life and the next. Central to Rousseau's philosophy is the idea that laws and social contracts possess a sacred nature. He advocates for religious tolerance, asserting that in a world devoid of exclusive national religions, societies must accept all faiths that themselves embrace tolerance. However, he stipulates that such beliefs must not contradict the obligations of citizenship. Rousseau's ideas came at a cost. His book faced bans and public burnings, forcing him to flee France to escape persecution. His work challenges us to consider how faith and civic duty can coexist, promoting a more inclusive society built on mutual respect and shared values. The Declaration of Independence asserts that all men are created equal and are endowed with inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This commitment to equality and individual rights is further exemplified in the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. Thomas Jefferson crafted this landmark document to ensure that all individuals, regardless of their faith, be they Jew, Gentile, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, or any other belief, are protected in their right to worship freely. Jefferson emphasized that Almighty God created the mind free, and thus no one should be compelled to support any religious institution or face persecution for their beliefs. The statute affirms that individuals have the right to express and argue for their religious opinions without diminishing their civil rights. Together, these principles laid the groundwork for a pluralistic society where diverse beliefs could coexist, promoting the essential values of tolerance and mutual respect. The U.S. Constitution and the First Amendment define American liberty and religious freedom. The preamble proclaims the intent of we, the people, to establish a government that promotes justice, peace, and the common welfare while securing the blessings of liberty for future generations. The First Amendment explicitly prohibits Congress from establishing a national religion or interfering with the free exercise of faith. It safeguards not only religious freedoms, but also the freedoms of speech, press, assembly, and petition for remedy of complaints. Together, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights articulate a commitment to pluralism and liberty, not merely as a privilege, but a natural right for all in a vibrant, inclusive democracy. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in San Francisco by the United Nations General Assembly in the aftermath of World War II, reflects the international community's commitment to prevent the atrocities witnessed during the war. This document emerged from a desire to establish a common standard of rights for all people, transcending national boundaries and cultural differences. Article 18 emphasizes the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, affirming the fundamental principle that individuals should be free to hold and express their beliefs without fear of persecution. This right is particularly significant in the context of the post-war world, where totalitarian regimes often suppress dissent and religious expression. Article 19 extends the notion of freedom to include opinion and expression, reinforcing the importance of open dialogue as a cornerstone of democratic societies. Article 20 asserts the right to peaceful assembly and voluntary association, highlighting the necessity of collective freedoms in fostering a vibrant civil society. Through the definition of these principles, the United Nations sought not only to promote peace and security, but also to champion the dignity and rights of every individual as the foundation for global governance. The Second Vatican Council was a transformative moment for the Catholic Church, with declarations on religious freedom and the relationship with non-Christian religions. Dignitatis Humanae asserts that every human being has an inalienable right to religious freedom, emphasizing that this liberty must be free from coercion by individuals, social groups, or any earthly powers. This document affirms the inherent dignity of each person, endowed with reason and free will, which compels them to seek the truth. In Nostra Aetate, the Church promotes respectful engagement with diverse faith traditions and rejects nothing true or holy in other religions. Christians are urged and encouraged to recognize and celebrate the spiritual and moral truths found in other cultures. The modern revival of the Parliament of the World's Religions is a major effort to cultivate harmony among diverse religious and spiritual communities while engaging with global institutions to promote justice, peace, and environmental stewardship. Central to its mission is the affirmation of a common set of core values across religious teachings, which forms a global ethic that encourages mutual appreciation and cooperation. Recognizing our interdependence, the Parliament emphasizes that the well-being of each individual is intrinsically linked to the health of the whole community, which includes all living beings, humans, animals, and plants alike. This calls for a deep respect for the earth, air, water, and soil, and the need for collective stewardship of our planet. By encouraging dialogue and collaboration among different faith traditions, the Parliament seeks to address pressing challenges and foster a sense of shared responsibility for the common good. The tragic events of September 11th, 2001 were a stark reminder of the perennial challenges of sectarianism and fanaticism that Swami Vivekananda called out in his opening remarks at the first Parliament of the World's Religions 108 years earlier. He highlighted how bigotry and intolerance have long troubled humanity, leading to violence and despair. The 9/11 attacks brought to the forefront the problems of religious intolerance and the misuse of faith to justify violence. In his speech, Vivekananda emphasized the urgent need for acceptance and compassion among diverse faith traditions. He envisioned a world where mutual respect and dialogue could replace the animosities that lead to conflict. The aftermath of 9/11 stimulated a renewed commitment to these ideals as communities worldwide began to meditate on the destructive power of hatred and division. Interfaith action gained momentum, aiming to foster collaboration and relationships across religious differences. The Marrakesh Declaration, alongside subsequent initiatives like the Washington Declaration and the Potomac Declaration, emphasizes the urgent need for interfaith cooperation in addressing the various crises that afflict humanity. These declarations articulate a collective recognition among religious leaders that true collaboration extends beyond mere tolerance. It requires the active protection of rights and liberties for all religious groups. This commitment is rooted in the belief that coercion, bias, and arrogance have no place in a civilized society. The Washington Declaration highlights our shared values as a foundation for unity, urging individuals and communities to work together in fostering harmony where discord exists. The Potomac Declaration and Plan of Action further emphasize that every individual has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. States are called upon to support civil society organizations and religious actors in their advocacy efforts, ensuring that the values of pluralism, peace, and tolerance are upheld globally. These declarations collectively inspire a vision of collaborative action that transcends differences and fosters a more just and compassionate world. The Peace Charter for Forgiveness and Reconciliation was developed during the 2000s as a response to the growing need for healing and unity in a world devastated by conflict and division. This comprehensive framework aims at fostering healing and unity across various spheres of human interaction and among individuals, families, communities, public institutions, states, and religious traditions. The Charter emphasizes that peace transcends the mere absence of violence. It is an inner tranquility as well as harmonious relationships with others and the environment. Drawing upon the wisdom embedded in the world's diverse traditions, including religious, spiritual, indigenous, and philosophical perspectives, the Charter champions a compassionate approach to conflict resolution. It acknowledges our shared human experience and seeks collaboration with all interested individuals, organizations, and public institutions, including the United Nations, to address the interdependence of humanity by supporting initiatives for healing, reconciliation, and peace building. The Charter encourages intercultural and interreligious dialogue and cooperation. Ultimately, it aims to cultivate harmony within our Earth community and unity among our human family. The document on human fraternity for peace and living together emerged from a historic meeting held in Abu Dhabi in 2019 between Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar. This landmark declaration emphasizes the collective responsibility to foster a culture of tolerance and coexistence in a world increasingly marked by division and conflict. It calls upon individuals who hold faith in God to actively work toward ending the cycles of violence, war, and environmental degradation that afflict humanity today. Global leaders and policymakers are encouraged to prioritize peace and humanitarian values, and additionally, intellectuals, artists, and cultural leaders are invited to champion values such as peace, justice, and human fraternity. Through dialogue and the promotion of a culture that embraces diversity and acceptance, this initiative aims to alleviate pressing economic, social, and environmental challenges and foster a more harmonious global community. The Charter for the New Alliance of Virtue was created to address the pressing moral and ethical challenges posed by technological advancements that, while often beneficial, can also lead to violations of human dignity and ecological imbalance. The Charter recognizes that a technocratic mentality can overshadow the essential values of human dignity, freedom of conscience, and justice, ultimately disrupting the harmony of societies. It establishes guiding principles that emphasize tolerance, peace, and the importance of mutual respect among diverse faith communities. By promoting a conciliatory approach, the Charter aims to foster stronger relationships within and among religious traditions, encouraging dialogue and cooperation in all dimensions of community life. One of its key objectives is to support the United Nations in achieving its 17 Sustainable Development Goals as outlined in the 2030 Agenda. By aligning efforts toward these goals, the Charter seeks to create a framework for sustainable development that is rooted in ethical considerations and respect for all people. The Parliament of the World's Religions presents a compelling vision for a global ethic, asserting that a new global order requires a foundation built on shared values rather than mere laws and regulations. Fostering human rights, justice, peace, and environmental stewardship is a collective responsibility and essential for a harmonious world. The Parliament emphasizes that this global ethic is not about creating a singular ideology or dominating one religion over others. Rather, it seeks a consensus on universal values that reflect our shared humanity. The principles outlined in this global ethic advocate for the humane treatment of every individual and establish irrevocable directives, including commitments to nonviolence, solidarity, equal rights, and environmental stewardship. These commitments are essential for promoting a just economic order and a culture of tolerance. Similarly, the Charter for Compassion highlights the necessity of compassion as a dynamic force in addressing polarization in society. It emphasizes collaboration at all levels, local, national, and global, to foster compassionate systems and cultures. Together, these frameworks advocate for a just, peaceful, and sustainable world, highlighting the importance of collective action and shared responsibility. Furthermore, the Parliament calls for a transformation of consciousness, encouraging individuals and communities to embrace these standards in their daily lives. Swami Vivekananda said, "We want to become harmonious beings with the psychical, spiritual, intellectual, and working sides of our nature equally developed. Nations and individuals typify one of these sides or types and cannot understand more than that one. They get so built up onto one ideal that they cannot see any other. The ideal is really that we should become many-sided. Indeed, the cause of the misery of the world is that we are so one-sided that we cannot sympathize with one another. Each man, according to his nature, has a peculiar tendency and takes to certain ideals and a certain path by which to reach them. But the goal is always the same to all. The word toleration has acquired an unpleasant association with the conceited man who, thinking himself in a high position, looks down on his fellow creatures with pity. This is a horrible state of mind. We are all traveling the same way towards the same goal, but by different paths made by the necessities of the case to suit diverse minds. We must become many-sided so as not only to tolerate, but to do what is much more difficult, to sympathize, to enter into another's path and feel with him in his aspirations and seeking after God. His guru, Sri Ramakrishna, said, "One should not think my religion alone is the right path and other religions are false. God can be realized by means of all paths. It is enough to have sincere yearning for God. Infinite are the paths, and infinite the opinions. Find God. That is the only purpose in life. Be illumined.